Hello, one and all. Thanks for your interest in A Thousand Splendid Suns at Seattle Opera. I'm Jonathan Dean, Seattle Opera dramaturg, and what a fantastic thrill it is to be here with our music team for this world premiere opera. Our maestro, Viswa Subbaraman, and our composer, Sheila Silver. It's not often we get a chance to have a composer in the room as we're putting together an opera here at Seattle Opera. You both have a lot of connections and a lot of things to tell us about this particular opera, but I actually wanted to start with both of you, just by way of introduction, for those of our audience who don't necessarily know you, with your connections with Seattle and with Seattle Opera. Sheila, you're a native.
I'm a native, born and raised here, grew up in Seward Park area, actually near Pritchard Beach for the Seattleites who know.
Pritchard Beach?
Pritchard, right above Pritchard Beach to the north.
Grew up swimming in Lake Washington.
I grew up swimming every single summer, every single day. Yes, I'm a water person.
Mm-hmm.
You can't come from Seattle and not be a water person. And went to Rainier Beach High School, went to a couple years at the University of Washington, and then my interest in music and composing took me on a wonderful journey away from Seattle.
Did you ever connect with, when you were growing up, was there a Seattle Opera?
Yes, I saw my very first opera here at the Seattle Opera House, Boris Godunov.
Oh my gosh.
When I think I was a senior in high school or freshman in college, something like that.
Viswa, this is not your Seattle Opera debut.
It's not. So weirdly enough, this was supposed to be my Seattle Opera debut, but then when COVID happened and everything got pushed, we ended up doing Flight. And
our sort of movie opera
version of Flight, which was the most ridiculous way to get introduced to an opera company, but it was amazing. And then last year I conducted Blue, and then now we're here doing A Thousand Splendid Suns.
And this particular opera, which is an American opera, but set in Afghanistan, has a deep connection to the music of Central Asia and South Asia. I wonder if you could actually, again, before we get too much into the weeds with Thousand Splendid Suns, tell us a little about your own connection to that world of music, the music of Central Asia and South Asia.
I mean, for me, I grew up with it. I mean, my mom studied Carnatic music as a child and then sang it at home all the time.
And sorry, Carnatic
music is one of the traditions of India. It's more South Indian. Hindustani music is more North Indian. So I grew up with that at home, and then most of my mom's side of the family actually studied Carnatic music, so I heard it a lot growing up. And so that sound world is in my ear. I can't say I'm conversant with it in the same way that Sheila is, but it's definitely a sound world that's in my ear. And then more recently with the project I helped start with, which was the South Asian Symphony Orchestra that Ambassador Nirupama Rao started in India, which is made up of musicians from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and India. And it's kind of bringing all of South Asia together to make music. The first time I had the opportunity of doing a Western piece and translating to non-Western musicians and trying to figure out how to bridge that gap. And also the first time I actually got to know musicians from Afghanistan because we had members of the Afghan Youth Symphony in that orchestra.
Mm-hmm. Afghan Youth Symphony. Tell us a little bit more about that group.
Some of them are actually now in conservatory here in the U.S. And I mean, it's a sad story, but also one that is hopeful, in that when the Taliban retook Afghanistan, they were basically airlifted out, and the National Conservatory of Afghanistan is now in Portugal. You know, and we were literally sitting here for days while the Taliban was retaking the country, wondering what was happening to our friends. You know, because music is banned in Afghanistan.
No
now.
music making in public.
No music making.
In
musicians
private?
are persecuted. We've heard stories of musicians burying their instruments so they wouldn't be caught with the musical instrument, and hopeful that one day they can actually dig them up and start playing again. And so, in a lot of ways, it's a very strong connection to this work, and it's an important work because it reminds us that a country that we've had so much contact with for 20 years, you know, is not in the best situation, but there's also beauty in the country, as the Thousand Splendid Suns show, you know.
Mm. We have some footage, courtesy of Christina Scheppelmann, who brought the Afghan Youth Symphony to Muscat in Oman when she was leading the Royal Opera House, Muscat. Young musicians and that diversity of instruments representing the different traditions.
Right, and they can go from back and forth so easily with such facility. I'm so jealous of that upbringing in that way.
Now, Sheila Silver, you also have a interesting connection to the music of, in this case, more Hindustani music,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
Tell us a little bit about how you
when
entered that world.
When I decided to write an opera based on this story, I had to do a lot of research. You don't just take a story that's set in contemporary Afghanistan and go at it with your totally American roots, right? So the first question I asked, well, what's the music in Afghanistan? And I did some research, and I found that Hindustani music was prevalent at the court in the 18th century, and there's a lot of cross-culture between Pakistan, northern India, Bangladesh, Afghanistan. It's all, you can't, cultures are constantly, mixing and merging, and yes, even think about it this way, we have a Baroque, French Baroque, an Italian Baroque, and a German Baroque. They're a little different. They're slightly different, but there's a basic understanding of the tonal system and how it's being used. Well, I would say that for Hindustani music, there's a basic understanding of the raga system and the rhythmic system and how it's used.
And all those countries that you're mentioning, those are all modern creations.
Yes,
None
and
of
they're
those
all
boundaries
absolutely all modern creations by the
existed when the
British.
music was moving.
The music was always moving and cross-pollinating. And so I did after that research, I said, okay, well, I think I should go study this music. I was introduced to a musical family because these people study music from generation to generation, and I was basically welcomed into the inner bosom of a musical generational musical family, and I studied with both the father, Bodas, Professor Bodas, we call him Nana, and his son, Kedar Boda. They always understood that this was to understand the music. Once somebody understands the raga, then they introduce certain bondages, early easier ones and harder ones, I guess. I got fairly traditional ones. I saw the other students learning the same ones I was learning, which helped me hear them sing them. And the Hindustani musicians revere the voice, and it's considered, the highest instrumental form. So other musicians, like we always had bansuri players and always tablas in the class. Not that a tabla can sound like a voice, but sitars were often there. So he would sing, and then they would respond in their voice, whatever instrument they were playing. And all the students recorded the lessons, and they go home and they practice them. And I recorded the lessons, and I went home and I transcribed them into Western notation. And
that's not really part of
that's not kosher. It was not kosher at all. But I have notebooks this high of every single lesson I ever had with him, because I transcribed every single lesson I ever had with him. So the first couple days I would go home and transcribe it, learn it, and come back and sing it. And he was amazed that he was very curious to learn our notation system, because he was amazed that I could do it. And so he pretty quickly said, okay, I can teach you about, in 5 months, I can teach you 5 years of Hindustani. At my age, after all those years of being a teacher, I got to be a student again. And I was kind of, palsy with the students, because we were all a little bit afraid of the teacher, and I was too. And it was so nice to be on the other end. And after being a teacher for so many years, I knew how to be a student. I knew how to study, and I did not go unprepared. Even if I had to get up at 4 in the morning to be prepared when I went there that day.
That's very interesting.
So
teachers do make good students, lifelong learners.
Yeah. And so it was, and when I went, I said to my husband and my son, I don't know what we're going to learn there. I don't know what's going to happen, but we'll have an experience. But I had no idea how profoundly the music would influence my own composing. That was the discovery.
Now back up with me a little bit, because your trip happened after your encounter for the first time with Khaled Hosseini's book, A Thousand Splendid Suns, and your idea to make this into an opera. Tell us a little bit about how that came into to be.
I first heard the book as a book on tape, audiobook, commuting to and from Stony Brook, where I teach. I had a long 2-hour I had a 4-hour commute, but 2 hours on the highway.
Thank God for audiobooks.
Yeah, time for audiobooks. And I remember at the execution scene, driving down the highway, the tears are streaming down my eyes. I'm going 60 miles an hour, and I'm crying.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, and
didn't say who was executed.
Yeah, and I said, this is so operatic, And at the time I was, I thought, the emotions are larger than life. And what I was drawn to was the love between these two women. This is a love story between two women, not a mother-daughter bonding, sisterly love between two women. And the sacrifices that they make for one another is they survive through the power of their love. And I thought that was pretty profound. And there's two love stories going on. One is between the young Laila and Tarek, and they're 15, 16 or whatever, 14, 16. They're
a little bit more conventional.
Yes, conventional
like
love.
Romeo and Juliet kind of young kids.
Young
love
lovers. So that's playful, joyful at the beginning anyway. And then there's the love between Mariam and Laila. And so these two parallel love stories are going on. And it's about love. It's a love story. In spite of all these difficult things, it's about love.
The great operas that we consider still, right, are all, even if they're tragic, there's a true love that's beyond like just normal emotion, right? It's larger than life. And that's why we love it as opera, whether it's Tosca or Bohème or A Thousand Splendid Suns. And I think it does lend, that book is that. It lends itself to this kind of storytelling very beautifully.
Now, in terms of telling the story, the two of you are in charge of kind of the musical side of the storytelling. There's a lot of other people involved. And I wonder, Sheila, if you could tell us a little bit about our librettist and his role in shaping or making the book into an opera.
Steve's tradition is music theater.
This is Stephen
Kitsakos.
And you've worked with him.
This is our third opera. He's a Sondheim expert. He's a musical theater expert. He really has a sense of what makes good theater. And that's what I wanted in him. I didn't care that he wasn't an expert in opera. He was an expert in drama on the stage. And he's very easy to work with. And after we got the rights from Khaled,
You approached Khaled Hosseini to say, how can we make your book into an opera?
Well, that took 10 months. That wasn't like overnight. But
were there sort of stipulations? Was he going to be involved in the?
Well, I wrote him. My husband always says to me, "You have to write short letters. Your letters are too long, Sheila." So I wrote a very short note saying, "Dear Mr. Hosseini, I would really like to make an opera out of your book." And I found his address online, and I sent it, and I get back an answer, and he said, "No, I don't know anything about opera." And I said, "Okay." I wrote back and I said, "Well, you don't have to know anything about opera because I work with my librettist. You just you don't have to do anything. All you have to, we would love you to come to the premiere, but you don't even have to do that, So he wrote back and he said, "I don't think so." And that was like that little opening. And I said, okay, now I have to read.
It's not a no.
It's not a no, And so then I said, forget the short letter. And I spent, several days writing a serious letter about why this was an opera. And then I got a phone call from his assistant, and she said, he says yes. And then a few months later, we met in San Francisco, and we talked some more, and so forth and so on. So at that point, then that was the fall of 2012. And so between 2012 and 2013, when I left for India in the end of June, that was when I started to really try to find this teacher, and that was when Steve and I would meet. Steve also lives in the Hudson Valley in upstate New York, and we would meet every 3-4 weeks and sort of plan what's the breakdown? How do you cut this thing down? And
it's a big novel.
It's a big
There's
novel,
a lot going
and
on,
a lot of challenges, and he had to telescope a lot of actions. But a lot of the words come right out of the book, and I think his libretto is brilliant.
The story is told so clearly, but he left room for music.
Yeah.
Too often you see libretti these days that are you have to compose them because everything's being said, right? But he leaves a lot of what we need to know to Sheila to give us in the music, And I think like I always joke about this. If you look at an old school libretto, it's like this thick, and now the libretti are like this, right? Yeah. And this one is actually beautifully like the length it's supposed to be, because there's room
in terms
for music.
of the repetition, like there are plenty of places in this opera where you repeat text because the emotion needs to go into a deeper layer, which is what they always did in opera for hundreds of years.
Yes,
and
always.
That hasn't been much part of the recent American tradition.
It hasn't, and I feel like we've gone too far down the road of having to tell audiences stories, like literally through text, as opposed to what the beauty of opera can be, which is the music gives you a greater illumination on the text, so some of the storytelling has to be left to the orchestra.
Right.
And in this case, we have that. And so we really do go back. I keep telling people it's like it's the weirdest opera in the best way, and that it's like Puccini in its give and take and beauty and melodic, but all of a sudden we have this Hindustani like scale structure and, set up with the bansuri player and a tabla player, and so you get this mix of things, and it's done so elegantly that it feels like it was meant to be this way. It's actually naturally written to be this, in the same way that we listen to Puccini, we just think it's supposed to be that way.
I'm going to talk about the tabla and the bansuri in this opera in a minute, but actually, Viswa, could you tell us a little bit more about the other member of the creative team here, Roya Sadat?
Roya
who's our stage director.
She grew up in Afghanistan, is an incredible filmmaker. And, the first time we met actually was in the saddest of circumstances. We were here for a design conference to really talk about kind of the structure of putting the opera up.
Visually what it's going to look like.
What it's going to look like, what are our color palettes, et cetera.
We're sitting in front of part of the scenic units that Seattle Opera has created for this world premiere.
It was in that time the Taliban retook Afghanistan. It was literally happening
that week.
There was one moment we were sitting at lunch, and of course Roya was distracted. How could she not be? And she showed us this video of people storming the airport in Kabul trying to get on planes. CNN didn't have the video until 3 hours later. She was getting WhatsApp messages from friends and family in Afghanistan. So we have a stage director who's so directly knowledgeable about the material in a way that none of the rest of us can be.
None of us could possibly be.
And so it's fun in the room because she has such insight that she can give the performers that really gives us a sense of reality of the moment.
The authenticity of this. Yeah. Yes, it's opera, but it's also pretty closely tied to real life and stuff that really did happen.
Right.
And is now happening again.
Yeah, it's now happening again.
Well, and I think that's the magnificence too of the book. It's it takes it was about 40 years of history of Afghanistan, like in the backdrop of the book. And we're also capturing those 40 years in opera, which is just amazing to me.
We'll do that. You'll be able to track in the costume design all of the different ways as we go from the 1970s into the 2000s.
Also musically, which is like kind of interesting, right? There's that duet between Tarek and Laila, and at one point he breaks into calling it also like rock ballad kind of moment, because we think of Afghanistan in this era, this Taliban era. But in that era, they were listening to the same music. There was like rock music on the radio.
This is where you told the tenor, sing this like Freddie Mercury.
Right.
The other day in rehearsal.
We were trying, to get that kind of vibe, because that would have been on the radio. I mean, they were as Western and cosmopolitan as anyone else in the 60s, right? In the 60s, 70s, right? And so Sheila captures that musically too by jumping into that.
And there's a whole scene, in the book, there's a whole scene about how the Titanic is the rage, and everybody's buying the book, in Afghanistan and reading it. Right. So I mean, there was a lot of, Western, influence, and they're raised under the Russians. Lila is born when the Russians come in, and so the Russians, while they were modern in the sense women went to school, Lila is being primed to be a doctor or a lawyer or a professor. She's, her father's educated. They're middle class educated people.
Right.
And Mariam is not. Mariam has never had an education, but Lila is a modern girl.
Actually, before we talk about the characters in a little bit more detail, let's talk a little bit more about the instruments. We have these two instruments, tabla and bansuri, which we don't usually have in Western operas. And how it came to the...
Well, look, it's definitely a challenge. It is not easy to do this, and I think we're both, Viswa and I are both working really hard to make it happen,
and we're learning a lot in the process.
And we're learning a lot in the process, and they don't really read Western music, and they have no experience really following a Western conductor, let alone a classical conductor. I mean, a pop conductor who might just be, one and a two and a that they could do, but more than that.
But this is fairly complicated, rhythmically fairly complicated score you've written with a lot of time signatures. Very like Stravinsky had, nothing on this piece.
This is not easy music by any stretch of the imagination. So.
The composer admits it.
And the composer admits it, but it's worth it. All that work is worth it.
It is, but we should also say it's not sonically difficult music, right? This is not like listening to some atonal opera, right? It's difficult music, but it is sonically very approachable.
It's very lush.
Oh, yeah.
Years, it's just difficult for the musicians to figure out. Wait, are we in 7/4? Are we in?
Well, it's the type of music that one of my conducting teachers told me never to conduct. It's ridiculously difficult music to conduct that sounds easy.
Well, why should you not want to conduct that?
Because you don't get the payoff. When you conduct really hard music and it sounds hard, everyone goes, "Oh, that was really hard."
This actually is a little opportunity. I wanted to ask the two of you, what does a composer want from a conductor? What does a conductor want from a composer? Normally, you don't get a chance.
You go first.
Oh, I go first.
You're not usually in a room with Giuseppe Verdi.
Well, so it's interesting. It's all like I think we were trying to figure that. A friend of mine and I were trying to figure this out. It's either my 10th or 12th world premiere opera to conduct. With Sheila, we've been able to work like very closely together on figuring things out, trying to find the right pocket for something to fit in, or can this be rewritten a little bit this way, just so it makes it easier for the singer to get the consonants out. But we've been able to have those interactions, and those are the best ways to work with the composer. When you can. We're all on the same team. That's the beautiful thing. We're all trying to get this on stage and make it the greatest possible work it can be. And I think with that, you'll have your frustrating moments. You'll have your moments where it's like, okay, well, let's see if this works, and let's see if the singer can do it, and then we'll go from there. And it's the natural way of working on a new piece, because it's not like doing Marriage of Figaro. You walk in, everyone knows it. I mean, like every singer, it's part of our ears. It's part of, we can argue about like whether it's going to be done in a more like modern style or a more whatever, like fine, but the basics of Marriage of Figaro, we know how it goes, right?
Nobody knows how this goes.
I mean, day one, the terror in everyone's eyes, right? Because you prepare, like everyone was prepared, and it's the best prepared group I've seen. But you don't know how it's going to feel or how it's going to sound. You don't know whether all of a sudden you're going to turn and the composer's got her face in her hands going, what are they doing to my piece? You just don't know any of that, right?
I've never done that. I knew Viswa from before, but the first time we worked together was last summer. Was it last summer? Yes. Mm-hmm. And they said to me politely, we need more music. And I said, I'm not writing any more music. No, not happening.
Opera's written.
Yeah, this is what it is. This is what you get.
Scene changes.
And then
You know how I convinced her? I said, Sheila, you've got all this beautiful music, but the Seattle Symphony is not going to get a moment to really shine and play. You have some of the best musicians in the world sitting in the pit. Write some music and let them run.
Let them do it, yeah. I'm expecting that it'll be unlike anything I've ever heard. Well, can you tell us a little bit about some of the orchestration choices?
I'll tell you about the orchestration.
Yeah, not just the bansuri and the tabla.
Okay, we haven't actually told you. So the reason there's bansuri and tabla is because those instruments were very familiar to me, and bansuri was we always had a bansuri player in the class, so I heard him being drilled and playing a lot. Mm-hmm. And
that's a wooden flute, but there's a lot of different kinds.
There's all different kinds, but
sizes, like an alto flute.
Yes, like many, but there's like many. Like they took me once to a bansuri house where the guy who makes them, and of all the players in Pune were there, and there were like hundreds and hundreds laid out on the floor, and the bansuri players were picking them up and trying them. So Steve uses about probably 5-6 flutes in the show. Mm-hmm. And I worked on this part with Steve over the course of 3 workshops. So we've been working on he's been with
our
me.
Our bansuri soloist.
Yes, he's been working with me since the spring of 2015 when we had our first workshop. And we had another one in January 2016, and we had another one in October 2017.
And I should point out that at one of those workshops in New York, that was where Aidan Lang, former general director of Seattle Opera, went to that workshop and went, oh my God, this is the most amazingly beautiful piece I've heard, and that's how Seattle Opera first got connected
exactly.
to it.
The connection came through Aidan. And then I found Deep Singh, who is a very eclectic musician. I mean, as a little boy, he was studying with Ala Raka, who is Zakir Hussein's father is a major
He's one of the lead tabla players, I think, you're going to find, right?
But Hindustani musicians, the parents say you have to have a profession. You don't just get to be a musician, because everybody knows even their musicians can't earn a living, right? So unless you can earn a living, first you have to get a degree, and he became an aeronautic engineer, so that's his degree. But then he really wanted to be a musician, and he came to New York. I don't know exactly the history, but he also arranges he writes pop music, and he's doing some shows on Broadway. He works with Cyndi Lauper. He's a record producer. He's got amazing ears, because these guys are trained to have amazing ears. So that's why he reads a little bit of music, because he looks at charts. But he's mostly responding to what you hear, and they respond to what they hear, not to what they see. He doesn't play everywhere. He plays mostly in the buoyant rhythmic things, either happy music or tense fighting music.
High energy
music. He doesn't play in the like where you have to
the love duets,
or when you have to play with rubato, or where he's going to make big retards, because that's not what they do.
Right.
But you also have in the orchestration solo trombone everywhere.
Oh, everywhere.
That's going to be a different kind of. There's one point where I think the trombonist is basically the muezzin calling. It's time for prayers, everybody.
Yeah, I transcribed a call to prayer into the trombone.
Let's talk a little bit about the singers. It's actually a fairly big cast, but 4 principal characters in this. How did you choose the voice types as you were?
Well, you have to remember one thing. I'm writing Western music, and I'm writing for the Western voice, and singers. I think it's rather traditional writing for the voice. I mean, I know what the voices can do and can't do, and they got to approach certain ways. And
I can't speak to why Sheila set someone as a baritone or as a mezzo, but the singers have been utterly incredible from day one. I'm some of the most prepared I've ever seen on a premiere. And they're risk-taking. Like, in this show, you have to be willing to take risk, and show vulnerability, because the characters are so honest.
Well, it's such an emotionally fraught thing. The prime rule of being an opera singer is sing it like you mean it, and to take seriously something which in some cases can be, really, really difficult material, which is where we get to. I mean, I would describe some of the action in this opera as harrowing.
Oh, and taking risk in vocal color, right? We have this thing about, I have this issue with opera singers who always want to sound pretty.
Beautiful, right.
And there are moments that are not. And it shouldn't be beautiful. Like, it shouldn't be, here's the best vocal technique and the best sound I can produce, right? This is not what you're singing about. It takes vocal risks to get there, and they're doing it, and they're finding those colors, which is exciting.
Yeah.
Does it take a kind of a emotional courage on the part of the singer to go through, what Mariam and what Laila have to, like, just the humiliation and the subjugation that these characters endure?
Hugely. I mean, I think every time you do an opera like this, you need a week off afterwards, just to kind of collect your emotional self, right? I mean, even doing Blue, because there's such
Last year, you were here exactly a year ago. We did Blue, which is, a very different kind of opera, a new American opera, but on a subject like this that is in
it's so
the news
direct,
every day.
Right? With Blue, it was about racism, it was about violence, it was about shootings and the death of black kids, right?
I mean, in a way, it's almost, is it art anymore, or is it about sort of a social function of this enterprise that we're doing?
I think the beauty of that, and I think the beauty of this, is it's art first. It's directly appealing to your emotional sensibilities because it's beautiful music, it's beautiful art, and then allows you to also have that window into the social justice side of it. I think it doesn't, I get really frustrated with composers who want to hit us over the head with social justice. I think it's great. I'm a social justice warrior. I'm obviously not white. I would love for us to be a better society, but I think the greatest moments of speaking to social justice happen because the art is beautiful and moving and passionate and human, not because we're being lectured. And I think that's the beauty of both of those pieces. But when you go to that place emotionally every night, it does get tiring.
I'm really impressed with the acting of the singers. I mean, I'm impressed with the singing, but But you know, in the olden days, opera singers, you know, were sort of stand and sing. They weren't like actors. And these guys are all incredible actors and actresses. And Roya is doing a great job, I think, with the direction, because you know they're talking about the situation and they try one thing, and then the singer-actor will say, well, this is more comfortable this way, and she'll say, good, you know, do it that way then, but try this with it. You know, she's very flexible and very calm.
Oh,
she's amazingly
well, it
calm.
also helps to have Anderson in the room, our assistant director, because you know Roya's only worked in film, so the
This will be her
stagecraft
opera
side,
debut.
the stagecraft side, Anderson's really helped her a lot with.
No, he's very experienced. He's been with Seattle Opera actually 10 years. And
He was the assistant director, interestingly, on Blue as well. So
he's terrific with her, and remember, she's coming to Western music,
Also
to the
true.
art form of opera as a brand new thing. I mean, this is a person I'm sure who'd never seen or heard an opera ever.
Oh, yeah,
Ever,
we were talking
ever.
about that. And, you know, it's so funny. She came up to me the other day and she said, so Viswa, is there really so much music after this? I said, yeah. She said, okay. Now I have to figure out music. And it was so great because it's that you don't, right? Usually I'm the what we do is post-production, right? In film, like the music is added last, and now we had rehearsals before she even started. You come first. Right, you know, so it's like, it's just a kind of a new, but she's loving it. And it's so great to watch someone look at it with a lens that, like, so we're in it all the time, and she's walking in with a lens that's so completely different, looking at it like with a fresh face. It's almost like traveling with someone who's never been to a place and they see everything, and you're kind of like a little jaded. So it's like,
But you get that energy.
But you get that energy from
you're
her.
right.
It's
That
so
really
great.
is amazing. That it sounds like really some of the most inspiring kind of collaboration, teamwork. What is the job of the audience member in terms of the team of we're doing A Thousand Splendid Suns? What do you want from the
Audience?
public?
I think nobody's ever asked me that question.
I think they're going to happy cry. I think it's that kind of piece. It's like, to me, I want them to be as emotionally vulnerable as we are.
Yeah.
To experience the piece with the honesty that we're trying to give it.
Right, and not to be like people think, oh, modern opera, and they roll their eyeballs. You know, it's to come with an open heart and an open mind, and just allow it to take it in. Because if you just allow the music to take you and not try to, you know, be afraid of it, it will just take the audience.
Absolutely.
No fear.
No
It is a kind of enterprise. I think Roy has described the courage that it takes to engage with the subject matter here, which is heavy stuff.
And I'll say something else. It has traditional arias. For those that want
Right.
to just go see the same old things all over and over again, this has traditional arias.
Love music, love duets.
music.
We
It
haven't
has
had that
lots
in a
and
while.
lots of love music and lots of tender
You have the
things.
beautiful, the tenor soprano,
Yeah.
kind of young lovey-dovey, but my favorite
Yeah.
thing in the whole opera is the father-daughter.
Oh, the father-daughter,
music,
there's
which is
that one too, yeah.
Nostalgic and kind of Giuseppe
Yes,
Verdi
yes,
style, you
yeah.
know, that beautiful
Well,
tenderness. And he's going to have to leave his home of his many years.
And it's we also, you know, had to try. We really were careful, Steve and I, in that we're painting a really bad guy, and he's a victim too. He's a victim of the circumstances.
You're talking about Rashid.
Yes,
right
he's
there.
a victim of war. He's a victim of everything that's happened to him, and he's a victim of his culture, and he's a victim of his point of view, you know, of life. But there's Hakim, who's his loving father. There's Tarek, who's a loving boyfriend, fiance, who'll do anything for Lila.
But even Rashid, you know, at the very beginning, seems to be trying.
He's trying his
You know,
best. Yeah.
in the only way he knows how, which is not the best, but he does try to, like even that, like I'm going to show you around Kabul
Right,
moment.
No,
yeah.
he has that beautiful
There is
aria
that-
at the beginning that
Yeah.
you've written to give us that
Yes.
more of a 360 view of
Yeah. Although
him as a
I
person.
have to tell you, and I don't know if you've noticed this as well, but in Rashid's music, I put him in ragas. Every aria, by the way, is based on a raga.
And a raga is kind of a Hindustani scale structure.
Like a scale structure. So that means every time I come back to that raga, there will be some association. Even if I use different way of doing it, it will be intrinsically connected. The ragas that he sings a lot from is Lalit, and it doesn't have the fifth degree. There's no, in Western music, do and sol are the foundation of the scale, and this doesn't have a sol, a fifth degree. do, re, mi, fa, sol,
Yeah.
right? And to me that puts, that doesn't mean that I don't double put it in sometimes,
Right.
but the melodic pattern avoids it always. It doesn't
Well,
resolve
that
it.
explains why that aria about the tuberoses that he sings at the beginning. It does have this. I mean, it's as you
real
say,
It
thing.
doesn't go where you think it's
He's
going
trying
to
to
go.
be
Because,
tender. and
yeah,
it's
but it doesn't have the
quite
fifth
up
degree.
there.
It doesn't have the grounding.
Where's his
It-
heart?
So he
Yeah.
doesn't have that. He's not grounded because he doesn't. In our ears, I hear that as we don't have the dominant is not there, and it was really hard to write melodic music that avoids the dominant.
Yeah.
You know, so that's.
Fascinating. Well, something to listen to and then listen to again
Yeah.
as we
Right.
hear the opera over
Yeah.
the course of.
And at this point, I forget what I was doing, so I don't remember how I used the ragas. I don't even remember what ragas I used. I wrote them in the scores for me, so I would remember what I was doing there. And they kind of intertwine. You know, the prayer music will go into Bhairav, or it will go into Mia Kitoti, or it will go into any number of things. And they just kind of, pretty soon they're in your ear, and they just kind of, because composing is not, it's not conscious, it's unconscious.
Well, WC always used to say to his students, learn everything you can about music theory, everything you can about music history, and then forget it and write music. And it's a little bit like that,
Yeah,
right? You get it in, and that's what it feels like. And that's what I was talking with Ashraf, who is our bass, and Lila's father, Hakim. And we were having this conversation, and Ashraf grew up in Egypt.
I was going to say, he's one of the members of the cast who's actually Muslim.
And he grew up in Egypt, and we were having a conversation, and he said, you know, this doesn't feel like Orientalist art. It feels like it's a very natural way of writing music, and it feels honest, and it doesn't feel appropriated. He said, I was worried, and then I saw the music and started singing it, and he said, it just feels like this is exactly what it should have been.
Integrated.
And I think
into
that's
the
because
voices.
Sheila had spent so much time with Hindustani music that it wasn't a conscious, I'm using this for this, is she just wrote music. And
But I've never.
there's an honesty to it.
I've never been able to use quotes. I've never been able to sound like anybody else. I can't write pop music,
Right.
so I stay away from subjects that would need that. I have some things I can do and some things I can't do, but it always has to be, in the end, my music. And so this is, no one's going to come here and hear Hindustani music. They mustn't think that that's happening. They're going to come here and hear Western music and a Western opera, and with color.
Informed.
Color that,
With masala.
yeah, masala. That's what our tabla player always says. He wants to add a little spice, you know.
I like it.
And so that's what they're going to hear. They're going to hear a Western experience, but hopefully evoking the color of some part of that world. And central and critical, and the first primary to Hindustani music is the drone, which is always played by this tampura that you pluck. And they say that all of the overtones of the heavens are in the drone.
So I asked her once why she didn't use a Shruti box.
And I said, why would I use a shruti box when I have a whole orchestra? So I really would sit in my lessons when I was not on the hot seat, and I would listen to this tampura, and I said, how can I make that sound through the whole orchestra? And so I took a lot of chances. I don't know if they're all going to work. We'll make them work. He'll make them work. He can do anything.
But that's sort of the very, very beginning of the opera.
Yeah,
We start
yeah,
with
there's
that,
one there too,
and
but
you're just there.
Yeah, you're just there, and each one is different. Somehow orchestrationally, I kept wanting to do. Well, what should I do this time? It's like kind of like baking a cake. I want this cake to be lemon frosting, and this one is going to have chocolate.
And they all,
you
but they
know.
all have different activity too. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, if you really listen to it on board, there's like, it's a drone, but there's movement in it. Like the harmonics shift a little
Yeah,
bit, and
they
there's
have
this
to
kind
move
of,
because the harmonics shift
Right.
when you hear it there. It's not like it's not that. It's you hear these bands.
and then the overtones kind of come in and out, and it feels like there's movement in it, in the drone.
Yeah.
And that's what she's created with the way she's orchestrated some of these drones in the music.
And we're going to see.
We're gonna
whether-
see what's-
we're going to see whether they work.
They look like they'll work.
And it'll probably it sounds to me like they will be different every time we
Yes,
hear it.
they
So
will.
we've got 6 performances in Seattle. I'm guessing you have to come to all 6 to really get all the different perspectives on what this work is. And can't wait for February 25th.
But also, how amazing is it for this company in the city, right? You know, Seattle Opera producing this, and I think such a great new work that's going to be part of the canon. It really is a fantastic opera. But for Seattle Opera to be doing that, and for the city of Seattle, it's a testament to the city, really.
Viswa and Sheila, thank you so much for being here with us today, and thanks for what you're giving Seattle and our audiences and this art form with A Thousand Splendid Suns.